May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable to you, O God of hope. Amen. Good morning. Advent has got to be the most confusing season of the church year. Our culture lights up its darkness before the leftover turkey is cold. Yesterday, the Mill Creek Chorale gave a fine concert, if I do say so myself, and for Carol Lee. Full of songs about the happiest time of the year, a very Merry Christmas, joy to the world. And in that very same concert, another song asked, "What brought you to the manger?" What brought you to the manger, O Christ child, sweet and mild? Jesus, holy, undefiled. There was in the concert and in Advent proper a terrible tension. Which is this season? Is it one of glitter, of presents, of light? Or is it a time to examine exactly why God became incarnate as a tiny child in a barn? A time to explore the contrast between Jesus undefiled and humanity who again and again refuses to listen to God. Last week's reading from Matthew reminded us of the great flood, of God cleansing the house in response to humanity's betrayal of covenants with God. That was the first Sunday of Advent. Today, the second Sunday of Advent, we hear of John the Baptist washing away sins, washing like the flood washed, washing away sins in the River Jordan, cleansing humanity again. And then the powerful people, the Pharisees and Sadducees, show up. And John says, "Who warned you of the wrath to come, you brood of vipers?" He warns them of the one who is coming, who will bring a winnowing fork, who will lay an axe to the tree, who will burn the chaff with unquenchable fire. What brought thee to a manger, O Christ child, sweet and dear? Isaiah is also filled with tension between the sweet child and the wrath of God. On the one hand, he writes, "A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of its roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord." Isaiah also says, "He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked." And then, almost turning 180 degrees, there is one of the most beautiful pastoral images of Scripture. Isaiah tells us of a time when the wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. A little child. In today's gospel reading, John arrives in his camel hair clothing. This, by the way, is not the lovely camel hair sport coat I once bought at Nordstrom. This is rough stuff. John is rough, a man who is grounded in the earth and can survive on wild honey and locust pods. These are not insects, by the way. Isaiah foreshadows John, in a sense, as much as foreshadowing Jesus. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. And there is John cleansing people in the river. Fleming Rutledge, in his book, Advent, suggests that John is the key person of Advent. Listen to that. His announcement of the presence of God in the world and of the wrath to come because of the human failings sets the stage for Easter. Rutledge writes, "In Advent we pause to take stock of this uniquely sobering fact. The eternal judge whom John predicts is arriving. The very God of very God, creator of worlds, the Alpha and the Omega, has become a little child." How odd. And it is John who sets the stage, who shines a light on the dual aspect of Advent, another cleansing of the world and the arrival of one who is greater than great. Advent is, first of all, a time of cleansing. John says to the leaders, "Who warned you of the wrath to come?" Well, lots of people. Lots of history, floods to cleanse humanity. And I believe it's important that we update the warnings that are not heard. Who is warning us of the wrath to come? At Diocesan Convention this year, we talked about a lot of climate change. We talked a lot about climate change, about humanity's lousy stewardship of the gifts God has given to us. For me, this is a lot more serious than individual sin, and I believe we could get distracted by focusing on individual sin. I said to myself, well, who warned us of the disasters to come? Well, Al Gore, Rachel Carson, Aldo Leopold, Greta Thunberg. In a different sense, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And on and on. And we go on destroying God's gifts. Why wouldn't the Creator of all get angry and wipe away his creation? And yet, that is not God's decision, is it? What brought thee to a manger, O Christ child undefiled? I imagine God saying, well, I tried predictions. I tried floods, famine, fire, wars. Ouch. They just didn't get it, did they? Oh, wait a minute. What if I incarnated all my love in a child? Maybe that will convince humankind that love is the greatest and only solution love of everything I have created, including themselves. In one of his daily meditations, Richard Rohr, Franciscan priest and mystic, writes, "Christmas is already Easter." He explains that until the 12th century, Easter was the big celebration. Rohr writes that the Franciscans popularized and sentimentalized Christmas. Francis believed that if the incarnation was true, then Easter took care of itself. He taught his community to celebrate the birth of Jesus. Quote, "Once God became a human being, then nothing human or worldly was abhorrent to God. Distance and separation was forever resolved. We are all saved by mercy. We are all saved by grace." So what are we left with? Hope and only hope. Advent asked us to go into the darkness and learn and come to terms with our behaviors. Remember in Star Wars, when Yoda sent young Luke into a cave, remember? He says to Luke, "Luke, are you afraid?" And adolescent youth says, "No, I'm not afraid." And Yoda says, "You will be." What does Luke encounter? Himself and his heritage. If we go into the darkness, what might we learn? Before we sing joy to the world, before we deck the halls, before the Yuletide pageantry, let us go into the darkness and listen. Then we may be able to hear that still small voice calling us to love, love, love. If we do, then maybe, just maybe we will have a Merry Christmas. But it doesn't happen just because December 25th will arrive. It will happen when we receive the gift from God in the person of Jesus. The price of this gift, the road out of repeated cycles of God's destruction and wrath, is for us to offer our hearts. The song yesterday at the chorale said, "To thee, my heart I offer." My heart, my soul, and all I own. How do we get from Second Advent to the brilliance of Christmas? Well, we learn to wait. We learn to find hope. But waiting is so very hard for us. Remember the play Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett? I saw a production when I was in college. The play went on and on, recycling issues, waiting for Godot to arrive. The company staged it in such a way that tortured the audience, to the point that people got up one by one and left. Before the play was done, they had not the patience to wait for Godot. Waiting is hard, especially in our culture. When the power went off last week, we sat in the chilly house with our generator to protect our valuables, i.e. our frozen food, with candles and blankets, waiting for the light. And periodically we checked our app to see when our power would be restored. The trouble was, it was not to happen in our time frame. It happened when it happened, and suddenly the lights were on. A powerful and relevant example of waiting was shared with me by a former colleague, Sharon Delos Parks. She told the story. Each Wednesday evening, the single mom, a Native American, waited for a babysitter to arrive and oversee her young children while she attended a meeting. After weeks of these visits, the babysitter, a teenage girl in the community, began wondering where the mother was actually going. See, she had asked around the community, and there was no meeting on Wednesday nights. Curiosity got to the girl, and one night she bundled up the children and secretly followed the mother. Peering through a window of the meeting hall, she saw the mother seated by herself in a large circle of chairs. When the mom returned home, the girl confronted her, saying, "What are you doing? There's no one at that meeting. There is no meeting." The mother agreed and said, "Our community is suffering from alcohol illness. I am attending an AA meeting each Wednesday. Right now, I go there by myself, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting. At some point, others will join me." This is waiting. Remember when we had the patience to wait until midnight, Christmas Eve service, before we ever said Merry Christmas? At least in my house growing up, we never said Merry Christmas until we were walking out of church at midnight. If we cut Advent short, we run the risk of not learning what God calls us to learn. And yesterday's concert rings true again. "O Lord, how great thy perfect love that reaches from the heavens above, thy love for us by sin defiled, that made thee, God, a child." What brought God to come to us? We cannot instantly address the messes that we, humanity, have made, but following the love delivered in the form of a tiny child in a barn can. For God, nothing is impossible.